All right, hello everyone. How are you? I wanted to make a very short video to show some of the basic tools of Photoshop. This is by no means a comprehensive guide. There's lots of those out there online. But these are just a few of the things that I find myself using most often when I'm doing Photoshop work. And so therefore I wanted to do a little video to try to explain some of them in a very simple format. All right. So the first thing you notice when you open this up, I've rearranged my window just a little bit. You've got the same toolbars, but they might be over on the other side on the left. This is just how I prefer it. Your layers panel down here in the right is the most important part of Photoshop. That's actually one of the ones we're going to start with as well. I've just added a few things onto the background itself. You really don't want to do any editing to your background picture. This is your original picture that you're probably going to be adding stuff to, and you want to make sure that that stays original. You want to put some layers on top of it without altering the actual image itself. So the first thing to notice about Photoshop is when you go over to the layers panel, all of these boxes are empty, and the only one that has the eyeball is the background layer. The eyeball shows you what you're viewing here. So you can turn on and off different layers and groups just by clicking the eyeball pattern. So if I turn that off entirely, you see it's a transparent image. These checkerboard images are just showing that Photoshop knows that there's nothing there. If it was pure white, you could add a pure white layer if you want as a background, but Photoshop uses this pattern to denote that there's nothing there. If you saved this, nothing would show up. It would just be a blank image. So I'll turn the background back on. You can see there's now a white background. If you export this as a photo, this is what you would get. I'll turn the layers panel on and I'll expand the group by clicking this little arrow here, and you can see it goes down and there's a couple of layers within the group called layers. To be able to see them, I have to turn the eyeball on, so I'll do that. And now you'll notice that the red is the only thing that's showing up because it's the only eyeball that I have checked. If I check the blue layer eyeball, it will also show up and it will override the red layer, and we're going to talk about why. Layers in Photoshop are seen, they're visible based on how vertical they are to one another, where they are stacked. So any layer that is on top, closer to the top of this whole stack, will be shown in priority over the one below it. So that's why if I have both the red and the blue layer on, called top and bottom, you only see the blue right now. The blue is overriding the red. If I wanted to switch that, I can click and drag them. So I can drag the layer bottom up here and the little blue lines will show up. When I release the mouse button, the red layer will now be on top of the blue, and so that is what you will see. All right. You can also turn off the layer if you don't want to see the red at all. That's useful if you're doing like some very fine edits and you want to be able to see the difference between the two layers. But if you want blue on top of red, you have to drag it up. Whatever layer is on top is going to be shown. That's how Photoshop works. All right, so that's a very basic introduction to layers. I'm going to turn that back off. I'm going to go into masks now. And as you can see, I have the same layers. I have the blue and the red. I can do the exact same thing I did before where I drag them around and I switch them. But this isn't a layers tutorial. This is a masking tutorial. Photoshop uses masks and layers together to be able to allow you to form your composite images or whatever you want to do. So what I'm going to do is add a mask to this layer called top, which is blue. And how I do that is you look at all of these little icons on the bottom. This one with the little circle with the gray circle in the middle is an add a mask button. So if you click that, you can see that you have this white box shown up to the right of whatever your image is. Photoshop will make a difference between the mask right here and the layer. So if I click on the layer, anything I do to the layer now, I'm actually doing to the image, not the mask. If I want to edit the mask, I have to click on the mask and the little white boxes will go around the mask, and that lets you know what you're doing. So how masks work is when you paint with different colors, either white or black, it will show or it will hide the mask. So right now I have white shown. If I hit on my keyboard X, it flips foreground and background. So this close one is always the foreground color. If I hit B to use a brush and I want to go painting down here, I'll turn the flow all the way up. Now I'm clicked on my mask, and if I paint with my black brush on the mask, what that is doing is it is hiding the blue layer, and it's exposing anything that's under it. So in this case, I'm hiding the blue here wherever I painted, which is exposing the underlying red layer. That's what black does. If I make a mistake and maybe I take out too much of the blue layer with the mask, I can simply hit X again to switch my foreground and background colors, and now it's white. And if I paint with white again, you will see it is bringing the mask back. So I'm not painting with blue here. That is not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is I'm simply changing the mask itself. You can see that there's a little mini view here where the black shows you what's hidden and the white shows you what's exposed. So I can go through and I can redo all of this, and I can redo my mask. There are easier ways to do this, of course. But I just wanted to make sure that you understand what the masks do themselves. All right, and so you can do a thing again, right? So you can do all kinds of fun stuff that way. That's the essence of a mask. All right. Again, you use these in concerts with layers. So there is something called a clipping mask that is also very useful in Photoshop, and this is where we're going to start to use some actual pictures. So I'll turn the clipping mask layers on. What I've done is I've added in a picture of the night sky. I just downloaded it from the internet, and I have a nice little picture here. So if I want to do something else to it, maybe I want to add a picture of a moon. So I also downloaded a picture of a moon. I can put that in here. You'll notice that I've clicked on the layer itself, which highlights the moon, and the moon moves around that way. I can make it a little bit smaller, if I want, by clicking on it and dragging it down. You can hit Control-T, Control or Command-T to bring up the transform dialog box. And when you're happy with it, you can hit the check mark up here, and that will save your thing. All right, so I've got this really nice night sky, I've got this really nice moon, and I think to myself, well, hey, maybe I want the moon to have a little tinge of red or something to it. And so what I can do is I can add in a new layer, which I have here. I'll show you how I do that. I go down to the half circle here. It says create a new layer. I go up to solid color, and I can now choose any color I want. I mean, maybe we want, I don't know, maybe we want a green moon, right? Like a dark green moon, whatever. It doesn't matter. So again, the layer effect comes into play here. Because the green layer is on top of the moon, that is what you see. Whatever is the topmost layer is the one that gets shown. And so clipping masks, what they do is they take the layer that you have and they will attach it to whatever layer is immediately below it. So the effect will only apply to the layer immediately below it. Right now, this green layer applies to everything below the green layer in my layers panel. So all of these layers over here are getting affected. But I don't want that. I just want the green to affect the moon. So I can hold Alt on my keyboard. It's Option on a Mac. And if you see, when I hover over this line between the color fill 2 layer and the full moon picture, it changes to this little arrow with a box. That's what I want. So I'm still holding Alt or Option on a Mac, and I'm clicking when this icon appears, and you can see that an arrow shows up here. It's showing you that my green color fill layer is only applying to the full moon layer right now. And that's what I want. That's called a clipping mask. So now my moon is green. Obviously it comes with a mask, and so I can do the same things I did before. I could paint with black if I get a brush, and I can like hide some of this layer. Maybe I only want like the middle of the moon green, and then I say, oh no, actually, you know what, I don't want that. I'm going to paint it all black, and then I'm going to switch to white, and I'm just going to do the edge of the moon, and that could be green if I want. Now I can color in this night image. Watch. So I'm coloring. I'm on a tablet right now. I'm coloring, but nothing shows up because it's clipped to the moon layer. So only the moon layer will be affected by my clipping mask, my green color. I can do anything I want to the other stuff and nothing will happen. Only the moon will get changed when I use that particular mask. So clipping masks are very, very useful. You can go in and change the color later if you want. If I just click this again, I can double click it and change it to maybe I want like a red moon, right? I can do that. And then I say, oh my gosh, I painted way too much. I'm going to go back to black and get rid of some of this. And I just want the outer layer of my moon to be red or something like that, right? So clipping masks are fantastic. You can always go back and add and change things once you've made them. All right, next, opacity. Also a very good tool for Photoshop. So just so you can see, I have a picture here, but it's a vertical orientation. And so this background picture way from the beginning, way in the beginning, is the thing that is still showing up because I have the eyeball checked. So if I turn that off and I come back to Washington Monument, I now have this blank stuff on the sides of my picture. Since it's a vertical picture in a horizontal Photoshop document, I have all of this stuff. So same thing that we did before. This is what I'm going to do. I'll show you again. You can click the Add Adjustment layer. Once you're selected on the right layer, you can do the Add Adjustment, Solid Color, and maybe I want a nice white background and hit OK. Now again, Photoshop will always add a layer above the picture that you're currently working on. So if you want your picture on top of the white background, you have to reorder the layers. I will drag color fill below the Washington Monument and let it go. And now I have this really nice white background instead of the transparent background that I had before. So that's how I did that. All right, this is not a layer tutorial, this is an opacity tutorial. So let's go and add a moon again. I'm feeling very moon-centric today. So I've added this moon, and maybe I want to make the moon glow, right? So I've added a new layer that I've called Moon Glow. I do that simply by clicking on this plus. It will add a new layer in front of it. And to rename it, you click and type. So I can get rid of this one. So I've added a layer called Moon Glow. Let's give it a nice like light blue, not real opacity kind of glow. I'll take my brush. I'm going to turn the flow down to maybe 20%, 30%, and I will paint just a tiny little bit of moon glow on the outside of the moon. Maybe I want something like that, and I can say, oh, the Washington Monument should definitely get a little bit of glow here, you know, from the moon, etc. Right? So I've painted on this glow and it looks really cool, and I think to myself, you know what, that's a little bit too much. It's a little too much glow. I want just the tiniest hint of glow, and that's where opacity comes in. So with this layer selected as it is, I can go up to this opacity, and it's currently 100%. So it's showing 100% of what I did. It's showing all of my work. If I take that down, though, you can see that the image will lose a little bit of the intensity. I can drag it all the way up to 100. I can drag it to 50. It loses a little bit. I can drag it down to 15. You can barely see it. You know, so if I took a little more time and I wanted like the tiniest bit of glow, I'm not sure how this comes through on the video, but on my screen, this is a tiny little bit of glow at about 40% or so. And you can use opacity for that. Opacity is great for toning down some images if you overdo it, if you go a little bit too much on the color. All right, another example. I'm going to turn those off. I'm going to turn on my, my Darth Vader friend here in my white background. So I imported another picture of Darth Vader. Excuse me, Darth Vader. And maybe I want to make his saber glow red. So I can choose a new layer. I can get my brush tool. I can pick a really cool, a little bit darker red color. Again, low flow. Flow is how much of the effect gets put down on one swipe. So a low flow will mean you put down just a tiny little bit of red color, and I can always go back over it again. I'm using the bracket keys to make my brush bigger and smaller as well, the two bracket keys. So if I start painting over my lightsaber, you know, this gives it a really cool, I'm going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I'm giving it a really cool glow effect. Maybe make it a little smaller, and I want the center, you know, really red. And then I make it a little bit bigger, and I want like just a vague red on the outside, right? Something like that. Obviously, I would take more time normally. This is a good illustration. And I look at that and I say, oh, that's, that's a little bit too much. I don't want it to glow quite that much. So again, I go to my opacity. I could turn that layer down little by little until I get the effect that I want. And I go, well, maybe that's not quite enough. I want a little bit more. I go back up and I can adjust it to whatever I want. All right, so that's the essence of opacity. It's how much of what you did shows in your final image. All right, last super important thing that Photoshop requires. These are blending modes. This could be a massive video in and of itself. Blending modes are wildly complicated, but I'm going to do the basics. Your blending modes are all found right here. So it says normal right now. This is a normal blending mode. But if I click it, these are all of the different options that you have for blending modes for the individual layer that you're working on. All right, so this is just simply a car picture. I found a picture of a race car online. Again, I added a color fill layer. You can see it didn't quite fit the box, which is fine. So I added a little white color fill layer. So these are all the blending modes, and they do a lot of funky things. So let's say for this race car, it's a cool picture, but I want to add a little like dust and smoke. All right, so I also downloaded this dust and smoke picture from online. It looks really cool, but it's really, really dark and too big. And so obviously this isn't going to work for our race car. So by hitting the letter V, I can adjust this layer. I can click and drag it, first of all, to make it a little bit smaller if I want to add some smoke to the tires back here. I can even hover over it until the icon changes to this curve. You can see the arrow curves, and I can change it like a little bit like this, maybe a little bit smaller, I don't know. Maybe it needs to be a little skinnier, so I hold shift and I can drag just the edge, something like that. All right. So that looks really cool, but I've still got this problem of it's a black background, and I don't want that. I just want the smoke. This is where blending modes come into play. If I change this blending mode to something like screen or lighten, it will get rid of all of the black pixels. It will only save the white pixels, which in this picture is what I want. I just want the white smoke. So I can choose screen or lighten. You can see they both sort of do the same thing. I think screen gives a little more of like a ghosty feel, which I like. I'm going to choose that. So now I've gotten rid of all of the black pixels in the background, which is great. And I can combine this with our layer masks. So I add a new layer mask. I'm making sure that the layer mask is checked. I'm on black because I want to get rid of these really hard edges. So I choose a brush. I'm going to crank my size down. I'm going to keep my flow nice and low because I can always paint over again. And so I'm going to go over and paint on my tablet, maybe a tiny little bit more flow. I'm going to take out some of these really harsh edges here and leave it with just some smoke. I want to do that again. I can simply make sure that my layer is checked. I hit Control J, Control or Command J. It will duplicate this layer. And so now I hit V, I can move this around and maybe flip it a tiny little bit, right? So like add a little bit more smoke over there. I can hit Control J again and make an additional copy of this. And maybe I want to like drag it over to, this tire over here, and I'll space it back out. Maybe I'll even like make it a little bit bigger, to add a little extra effect, and hit the check mark. Right, and so there you go. You can add things like smoke and whatever. These blending layers are perfect. Things like screen save the white, multiply saves the black. It's the opposite of screen. So there's lots of different uses for this blending layer, or blending modes. One last thing. Maybe I want to do something like add some fire coming out of the exhaust pipe, right? So same sort of thing. I downloaded this off of the internet. It's obviously way too big. I'm going to shrink it a little bit, and since it's on top, it's what's showing right now. So I'm going to flip this around. I'm going to add it to where I don't know, I'm guessing the car's exhaust is. I'm not entirely sure. We'll say that that's pretty good for now. I'll hit yes. I go to my blending modes. I choose screen or maybe lighten. Ooh, lighten's pretty cool. We'll do that. Now I've got this really great fire effect that got rid of all of the black layers. Maybe my opacity is a little high. I can drag the opacity down a little bit so it doesn't look too crazy. There we go. That's pretty neat. Maybe I want like another one of those, so I can hit Control J. I can duplicate it and drag it around and like twist it just a little bit to try to make it look not exactly the same, right? That's pretty neat. Make it a little smaller, give it like a second little fire effect. There we go. That's pretty cool. And again, the blending modes allowed me to do that, because if I go back to normal, you can see that black box, which I don't want. And so screen does that, right? And again, maybe these would look cooler below the smoke. I could highlight both of them using Control. I could drag them below the dust and smoke, and now this dust and smoke comes over my fire, as opposed to the other way where I can drag it over and the fire would go over the smoke that way, right? So interesting to sort of mess around with different layers and blending modes. I hope this was helpful, and have a great day. Bye-bye.